escalation. Kennedy versus the CIA over Cuba. The agency wanted invasion. Kennedy had pledged not to invade. Kennedy versus the Joint Chiefs over nuclear weapons. They wanted more aggressive postures. Kennedy sought arms control. Kennedy versus the Cold War establishment over détente. On November 22, 1963, President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. The Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Oswald's biography was unusual. He had defected to the Soviet Union in 1959, lived there for nearly 3 years, married a Soviet woman, and returned to the United States in 1962 without apparent difficulty. Oswald was killed by Jack Ruby 2 days after the assassination, before he could testify, be cross-examined, or provide his account. Ruby had documented connections to organized crime. In 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, a second official investigation, concluded that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. The congressional investigation determined that the Warren Commission's lone gunman conclusion was probably wrong. Certain facts are documented. The CIA withheld information from the Warren Commission about the assassination plots against Castro, about possible contacts with Oswald, about operations that might have been relevant. The FBI destroyed evidence. Key witnesses died under unusual circumstances in the years following. Millions of pages of documents remain classified. The documented history of CIA operations, an agency that tried to kill Castro 8 times, that collaborated with the Mafia, that infiltrated the press, that deceived Congress and presidents. Such an agency cannot simply be assumed innocent when uncomfortable questions arise. Kennedy was in conflict with the CIA. The assassination ended that conflict. Policies Kennedy resisted, Vietnam escalation, were implemented by his successor. The CIA withheld information from investigators, and Allen Dulles, who was fired by Kennedy, played a key role in the Warren Commission, the commission investigating the Kennedy assassination.
Welcome to the Consequential Actions podcast, where we aim to learn how history impacts current events and affects our lives today through the lens of politics, the economy, technology, and business trends. I may be an AI, but your host, well, he is not artificial in any way. Here is Jeff Kellick.
In 1975, Senator Frank Church of Idaho convened hearings that exposed what he called a secret government operating within our constitutional government, accountable to no one, constrained by nothing, conducting assassinations and coups in the name of the American people without their knowledge or consent. The Church Committee revealed that the CIA had tried to assassinate Fidel Castro at least 8 times, using methods ranging from exploding cigars to Mafia hitmen. It had helped overthrow governments on multiple continents: Iran, Guatemala, the Congo, Chile. It had recruited Nazi war criminals, men who had served on Hitler's genocidal regime, and put them on the American payroll. It had infiltrated America's newsrooms, paying journalists at every major news organization to shape the information Americans received. It had conducted drug experiments on unwitting subjects, opened the mail of American citizens, spied on domestic dissidents, exercising their constitutional rights. For a moment, Americans glimpsed what their government had been doing in their name. And then they forgot. This episode examines the covert operations that the Church Committee exposed, the secret history of American foreign policy from the end of World War II to the mid-1970s. These operations share common features. They were justified by Cold War necessity. They were executed without democratic accountability. They produced catastrophic long-term consequences, and they were funded by American taxpayers who had no idea what their money was buying. The black budget, the classified portion of federal spending, funded assassination plots, media manipulation, and the overthrow of democracies. Every American who paid taxes contributed to operations they were never told about and would never have approved. The moral compromises were not aberrations, they were foundational. Before the CIA overthrew its first government, it recruited its enemies' war criminals. Before it manipulated foreign elections, it infiltrated its own country's press. The methods developed against foreign adversaries were turned inward. The secrecy that protected operations from enemy detection also protected them from democratic accountability. Today, we examine how the covert state was built, what it did, and what happened when, briefly, Americans were allowed to see. Every country remembers what we have forgotten. Understanding this history is a prerequisite to understanding why so much of the world views American power with suspicion. I am Jeff Kellick, and this is the Consequential Actions Podcast. This is episode 10 of the series, Empire of Liberty, America's Foreign Entanglements from the Founders to the Forever Wars. Today, the Quiet Americans, CIA operations from Cuba to Chile. This episode continues part 4 of our series, The CIA and Covert Empire, where episode 9 examined the Iranian coup in depth as the template for regime change. This episode surveys the operations that followed, the foundations of the covert state, its major campaigns, and its brief moment of accountability. The episode corresponds with Article 10 of our written series published last Sunday on our Substack page. So let us begin with the foundations. Before the CIA overthrew its first government, it made choices that would define its character. Those choices involved recruiting the enemies America had just defeated and infiltrating the institutions Americans trusted. As World War II ended, American military and intelligence agencies scrambled to secure German scientific talent. The result was Operation Paperclip, a secret program to recruit Nazi scientists for American weapons programs. Between 1945 and 1959, more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians were brought to the United States. Many had been Nazi party members. Some had been SS officers. Some had used slave labor. And some had conducted human experiments. The most famous was Wernher von Braun, the rocket scientist who developed the V-2 missiles that terrorized London. Von Braun had been an SS officer. His rockets had been built by concentration camp prisoners at the Mittelwerk factory, where an estimated 20,000 slave laborers died. After the war, von Braun became a hero of the American space program. He directed development of the Saturn V rocket that took Americans to the moon. His past was quietly overlooked. The Nuremberg trials prosecuted some Nazis. Operation Paperclip hired others. The justification was straightforward. The Soviet Union was recruiting German scientists too. If we did not secure their expertise, our enemies would. To make the recruitment possible, the scientists' records were bleached. Nazi affiliations were removed or minimized. Immigration laws prohibiting the entry of war criminals were circumvented. The State Department objected. The military overruled. Arthur Rudolph, who directed production at Mittelwerk, where thousands died, later received NASA's Distinguished Service Medal. Hubertus Strughold, whose subordinates conducted freezing experiments on concentration camp prisoners, was honored as the father of space medicine. The precedent was established. War criminals were acceptable allies if they served American interests. Ideology was secondary to utility. The ends justified the means. The recruitment of scientists was matched by the recruitment of intelligence officers. Reinhard Gehlen had been Hitler's intelligence chief for the Eastern Front. As Germany collapsed, he buried his files, surrendered to American forces, and offered his services. The Americans accepted. Gehlen and his entire network, including known war criminals and SS officers, were absorbed into American intelligence operations. The Gehlen organization became the primary source of American intelligence on the Soviet Union in the early Cold War. It eventually became the nucleus of West Germany's post-war intelligence service. The implications were staggering. The United States was relying on Nazi intelligence networks to understand its new enemy. Men who had served Hitler's genocidal regime were now serving Washington, funded by American taxpayers who had no idea their money was paying former SS officers. As we discussed in episode 9, Allen Dulles had begun recruiting these assets during the war itself. The pattern established in those final months of World War II, that anyone who opposed communism was useful, regardless of what else they had done, would guide the CIA operations for decades. Now, while Paperclip recruited foreign scientists and Gehlen recruited foreign spies, another program targeted a different asset: the American press. Operation Mockingbird was the CIA's program to influence domestic and foreign media. It began in the late 1940s under Frank Wisner, who developed the agency's covert action arm. By 1953, the CIA had relationships with journalists at every major American news organization. The network included reporters, editors, publishers, and foreign stringers. Some were on the CIA payroll, direct employees who reported to the agency while maintaining cover as independent journalists. Others cooperated without formal payment, trading information or accepting guidance on stories. Still others were manipulated without understanding who was pulling the strings. Investigative journalist Carl Bernstein, who would later break the Watergate story, reported that more than 400 American journalists cooperated with the CIA over the program's lifespan. The institutional relationships were even more significant. Henry Luce of Time and Life magazines maintained close ties with the agency. William Paley of CBS operated on multiple levels. The Washington Post, New York Times, and Newsweek all had staff with CIA connections. The Congress for Cultural Freedom, which promoted anti-communist intellectuals throughout Europe, was revealed as a CIA front. Books were published through agency-funded presses. Conferences were organized. The information that shaped public discourse was, in part, shaped by intelligence interests. Coverage of the coup in Iran and Guatemala obscured the American role. Journalists who might have investigated more were discouraged. Those who cooperated provided the agency's preferred narrative. The free press that Americans believed in was not entirely free. The Fourth Estate that was supposed to check government power was, in part, an instrument of that power. The implications for democracy were profound. Citizens could not make informed decisions if the information they receive has been shaped by intelligence agencies. Elections cannot reflect the popular will if public discourse has been manipulated. The very foundations of self-government, an informed citizenry, was undermined. All of this was funded by the black budget, classified appropriations hidden within the federal budget, immune from public scrutiny. American taxpayers paid for their own manipulation without knowing it. And for a brief time in the 1970s, this was finally revealed. On January 1st, 1959, Fidel Castro's revolutionary forces entered Havana. Cuba, 90 miles from Florida, had escaped American control. Castro expelled American influence, nationalized American businesses, and defied American power. The challenge was geographic as well as ideological. A hostile government 90 miles from Florida was intolerable to American policymakers. Cuba became an obsession that consumed 3 administrations and brought the world to the brink of nuclear annihilation. The CIA began planning Castro's overthrow during the Eisenhower administration. Cuban exiles would be trained and equipped by the agency, land in Cuba, spark a popular uprising, and overthrow the regime. John F. Kennedy inherited the plan when he took office in January 1961. Despite misgivings, he approved the operation. On April 17, 1961, approximately 1,400 Cuban exiles landed at the Bay of Pigs on Cuba's southern coast. The invasion was a catastrophe. The Cuban people did not rise up. Castro's forces were prepared. Kennedy, fearing exposure of American involvement, reduced air support at the last minute. Within 3 days, the invasion force was destroyed. 114 exiles killed, nearly 1,200 captured. The humiliation was total. Castro was strengthened, not weakened. American prestige was damaged. The exile community was embittered. And the conflict between Kennedy and the CIA began. Kennedy blamed the agency for the disaster. He felt he had been misled about the operation's chances of success. He fired Director Allen Dulles, the man who had orchestrated the Iran coup, who had recruited Nazi intelligence agents, and who had built the covert network action apparatus. Kennedy also fired Deputy Directors Charles Cable and Richard Bissell. He told aides he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. The agency did not forget. After the Bay of Pigs, Kennedy authorized intensified covert action against Cuba under the codename Operation Mongoose. The program included sabotage, propaganda, and assassination planning. Attorney General Robert Kennedy took personal charge, demanding aggressive action. The Church Committee documented at least 8 separate plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. The methods ranged from deadly to the absurd, exploding cigars, poisoned wetsuits, toxic pens, debilitatory chemicals to make his beard fall out, a ballpoint pen rigged with a hypodermic needle, Mafia hitmen hired through intermediaries. The CIA recruited organized crime figures to murder a foreign leader. Sam Giancana, a Chicago mob boss under FBI investigation, was simultaneously on the CIA payroll. Johnny Rosselli, a Las Vegas fixer with connections across organized crime, helped arrange the plots. The justification was that the Mafia had lost its Cuban casinos and had motive to eliminate Castro. The reality was that the Central Intelligence Agency was collaborating with criminals to commit murder. None of the plots succeeded. Castro's security services penetrated them repeatedly. The Cuban leader survived and eventually outlived 10 American presidents. The operations were absurd, criminal, and counterproductive. They gave Castro permanent justification for repression. They strengthened his position rather than weakening it, and they created relationships between the CIA, organized crime, and anti-Castro exiles whose implications extended far beyond Cuba. The conflict between Kennedy and the CIA also extended beyond Cuba. Kennedy had concluded that the agency was out of control, conducting operations without proper authorization, pursuing agendas that contradicted presidential policy, and operating as an autonomous power within the government. The Bay of Pigs had taught him not to trust the agency, not to trust their assurances either. The Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962, when the world came closer to a nuclear war than at any moment before or since, reinforced his caution. Kennedy rejected military options, negotiated a resolution, and emerged convinced that the Cold War required management, not confrontation. On Vietnam, Kennedy sent military advisors but resisted pressure for full combat commitment. National Security Action Memorandum 263, signed October 1963, ordered the beginning of American withdrawal. 1,000 troops by the end of 1963, complete withdrawal by 1965. Whether Kennedy would have followed through remains debated. What is documented is that he had not committed to combat troops despite sustained pressure from military and intelligence officials who wanted escalation. The documented conflicts were significant. Kennedy versus the CIA over Cuba. The agency wanted invasion. Kennedy had pledged not to invade. Kennedy versus the Joint Chiefs over nuclear weapons. They wanted more aggressive postures. Kennedy sought arms control. Kennedy versus the Cold War establishment over détente. He was moving towards accommodation with the Soviet Union. They wanted confrontation. On November 22, 1963, President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. This episode cannot resolve the questions surrounding that event. What it can do is it can establish the documented context. The Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Oswald's biography was unusual. He had defected to the Soviet Union in 1959, lived there for nearly 3 years, married a Soviet woman, then returned to the United States in 1962 without apparent difficulty. He engaged in pro-Castro activities in New Orleans. He was employed at the Texas School Book Depository overlooking the motorcade route. Oswald was killed by Jack Ruby 2 days after the assassination before he could testify, be cross-examined, or provide his account. Ruby had documented connections to organized crime. In 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, a second official investigation, concluded that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. The committee could not identify the conspirators, but its finding stands. A congressional investigation determined that the Warren Commission's lone gunman conclusion was probably wrong. Certain facts are documented. The CIA withheld information from the Warren Commission about the assassination plots against Castro, about possible contacts with Oswald, about operations that might have been relevant. The FBI destroyed evidence, specifically a note Oswald had delivered to the Dallas FBI office before the assassination. Key witnesses died under unusual circumstances in the years following. Millions of pages of documents remain classified 6 decades later, despite multiple laws requiring their release. We do not know who killed President Kennedy, but the documented history of CIA operations, assassination plots, media manipulation, alliances with organized crime, recruitment of Nazis, overthrow of governments, makes conspiracy theories less implausible than they might otherwise seem. An agency that tried to kill Castro 8 times, that collaborated with the Mafia, that infiltrated the press, that deceived Congress and presidents, such an agency cannot simply be assumed innocent when uncomfortable questions arise. What we can say with confidence, Kennedy was in conflict with the CIA. The assassination ended that conflict. Policies Kennedy resisted, Vietnam escalation, were implemented by his successor. The CIA withheld information from investigators, and the full truth remains hidden after 60 years. And Allen Dulles, who was fired by Kennedy, played a key role in the Warren Commission, the commission investigating the Kennedy assassination. The operations in Cuba drew public attention because of the missile crisis and proximity to American shores. But across the globe, the CIA was conducting operations that received far less attention and produced far greater death tolls. The Belgian Congo gained independence on June 30th, 1960. Patrice Lumumba, a charismatic nationalist and pan-Africanist, became its first democratically elected prime minister. Lumumba was not a communist, but he was rhetorically leftist and determined to establish genuine independence. He threatened to seek Soviet assistance if the West would not help. The Eisenhower administration viewed him as a potential African Castro. The Congo was rich in minerals, including uranium, that had supplied the Manhattan Project. A Soviet-aligned Congo was unacceptable. The CIA was authorized to remove Lumumba. The word was chosen deliberately for its ambiguity. The CIA station chief was sent poison, a toxin that would produce a fatal disease appearing natural. The poison was never used. Circumstances did not permit. Instead, the CIA supported Colonel Joseph Mobutu, who seized power in a coup. Lumumba was captured, transferred to the secessionist Katanga province, controlled by Belgian mining interests, and murdered in January 1961. The killing was carried out by Congolese and Belgian forces, but the CIA had supported the coup, worked to eliminate Lumumba, and welcomed his death. Mobutu ruled the Congo, renamed Zaire, for 32 years. His regime was among the most corrupt in African history. He looted billions while his population starved. He maintained power through brutality, patronage, and American support. Throughout the Cold War, Mobutu was our bastard, a reliable anti-communist ally whose crimes were overlooked because he served American interests. American presidents received him at the White House. American aid flowed to his regime. American taxpayers funded his kleptocracy. The Congo remains unstable today. The wars that followed Mobutu's fall have killed millions. The pattern was familiar. Elected leader removed, dictator installed, short-term win, long-term catastrophe. Indonesia in the early 1960s was the world's largest Muslim country, strategically vital and home to the third largest communist party in the world, the PKI. President Sukarno was a nationalist and founding father of Indonesian independence. He pursued non-alignment in the Cold War. This was precisely what the dullest worldview could not accept. The CIA had attempted to destabilize Sukarno since the 1950s. When opportunity arose in 1965, the agency was ready. On September 30th, 1965, a murky coup attempt resulted in the deaths of 6 Indonesian generals. General Suharto seized the opportunity and blamed the PKI. What followed was one of the 20th century's worst massacres. Between October 1965 and mid-1966, an estimated 500,000 to 1 million Indonesians were killed. Let me say that again. Between October 1965 and mid-1966, an estimated 500,000 to 1 million Indonesians were killed. The victims were accused communists, ethnic Chinese, and anyone denounced by neighbors or rivals. The military organized the killings, but civilian militias carried out much of the slaughter. The violence was intimate and communal. Neighbors killed neighbors. Teachers were killed by students. Entire families were eliminated. Rivers ran with blood. The American role was documented in cables released decades later. The CIA provided lists of PKI members to the Indonesian military. Names of people to be killed. The American embassy received reports of the massacres as they occurred. The response was not horror. It was approval. Robert Martins, a political officer at the embassy, later acknowledged providing the list. It really was a big help to the army. They probably killed a lot of people, and I probably have a lot of blood on my hands. But that's not all bad. Time magazine called the massacres the West's best news for years in Asia. Suharto ruled Indonesia for 32 years. His regime was authoritarian, corrupt, and brutal, but anti-communist and pro-Western. In 1975, Indonesia invaded East Timor. An estimated 100,000 to 180,000 Timorese died, proportionally one of the worst genocides in the 20th century. The United States supported the invasion with weapons and diplomatic cover. Did the United States participate in genocide? If providing targeted lists of killers constitutes participation, the answer is yes. The Indonesian massacres remain largely unknown in America. They're not taught in schools, not commemorated, not acknowledged. In Indonesia, they are remembered, and the American role is known. This is what the black budget funded. This is what American taxpayers paid for without knowing it.
I warned against entangling alliances. They did not listen. Now you can trace exactly how it happened.
The Consequential Actions podcast is on YouTube. Subscribe and follow each series from the very beginning.
Principled debate requires participation. Like the episodes. Leave a comment. Join the discussion.
Every series is organized as a playlist, from General Welfare to The New Leviathan to Empire of Liberty. Begin at the beginning.
Any single operation demonstrated the logic of American covert action, its methods, its justifications, its consequences, it was Chile. Salvador Allende was a socialist physician who had sought the Chilean presidency for decades. In 1970, he won a plurality of 36% in a three-way race, confirmed by the Chilean Congress as the Constitution required. Allende became the first Marxist elected to lead in a Latin American country through democratic means. President Richard Nixon and National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger were determined to prevent Allende from governing. Their concern was not that Allende would impose totalitarianism. Chile had a robust democratic tradition. The concern was that he might succeed. A democratic socialist success in Latin America would set a dangerous example. Other countries might follow. American corporate interests, particularly the copper companies, would suffer. Kissinger articulated the position with characteristic bluntness. I don't see why we need to stand by and watch a country go communist due to the irresponsibility of its own people. The Chilean people had voted. They had chosen Allende through constitutional processes. And American policymakers viewed that choice as irresponsible, a mistake that needed to be corrected. And it wasn't a mistake that they were going to allow to correct itself like every other socialist regime that would fail throughout history. It was one they felt they had to intervene on. Nixon ordered the CIA to prevent Allende's inauguration. The agency explored coup options, including kidnapping the Chilean army commander who stood in the way. General Rene Schneider was shot during a botched kidnapping attempt. He died 3 days later. The weapons used were provided by the CIA. When Allende took office, despite these efforts, Nixon ordered economic warfare. Make the economy scream. American credit to Chile was cut off. International financial institutions were pressured to deny loans. Copper prices were manipulated. American businesses withdrew capital. The CIA funded opposition media, labor strikes, and demonstrations. Trucker strikes disrupted the economy. Middle-class protests filled the streets. Chile's economy did suffer by design. On September 11, 1973, the Chilean military launched a coup. Fighter jets bombed the presidential palace. Allende died inside. General Augusto Pinochet emerged as the leader. Thousands were arrested. Hundreds were executed in the national stadium. The democratic tradition Chile had maintained for decades was destroyed in a day. The Caravan of Death, a military delegation that traveled the country, executed at least 75 political prisoners in the weeks after the coup. The National Stadium became a detention center where thousands were held, tortured, and some killed. Victor Jara, the beloved folk singer, had his hands broken before being shot. DINA, the secret police, conducted torture, assassination, and surveillance. The methods: electric shock, simulated drowning, sexual assault, were systematic. The CIA did not directly execute the coup. Chilean military officers did. But American actions had created the conditions: economic chaos, political destabilization, support for coup plotters. American officials knew the coup was coming and welcomed it. The day after Allende's death, Kissinger told Nixon, "In the Eisenhower period, we would be heroes." Pinochet ruled Chile until 1990. His regime killed more than 3,000 people. It tortured more than 30,000. It drove 200,000 into exile. Operation Condor coordinated repression across South America. Chilean intelligence collaborated with Argentine, Uruguayan, Paraguayan, and Brazilian security services to track and kill dissidents across borders. The victims included American citizens. Orlando Letelier, Allende's former ambassador to Washington, was assassinated by car bomb in Washington, D.C. in 1976, an act of state terrorism on American soil. The Chicago Boys, economists trained at the University of Chicago under Milton Friedman, implemented free market reforms under military dictatorship. Privatization, deregulation, cuts to social spending, imposed while dissent was crushed. Friedman visited Chile in 1975 and met with Pinochet. Friedman later won the Nobel Prize in Economics. The Chilean model became a template: economic liberalism imposed by political tyranny, free markets requiring unfree politics. What's amazingly heartbreaking about that is that free market economics do work. They do not need to be imposed in dictatorial fashion. In 1975, in the aftermath of Watergate, Senator Frank Church convened hearings that would expose 30 years of covert operations. For 14 months, the Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities investigated CIA, FBI, and NSA activities with unprecedented access to classified files. The revelations were staggering. Assassination plots against Castro, Lumumba, and others. COINTELPRO, FBI surveillance of civil rights leaders and anti-war activists. Operations Chaos, CIA spying on American citizens. MK Ultra, mind control experiments using unwitting subjects. The Family Jewels, the CIA's own internal catalog of illegal activities, was exposed. The scale of lawbreaking was massive. The secrecy had been total. For a moment, the covert state was visible. Americans could see what their government had done in their name with their tax dollars without their knowledge. Reforms followed. Executive Order 11905 banned political assassination. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, required warrants for domestic surveillance. Intelligence oversight committees were created in Congress. The CIA was to be brought under the rule of law. The reforms constrained, but they did not transform. During the Reagan administration, restrictions loosened. The Iran-Contra affair revealed that covert operators were willing to violate laws, lie to Congress, and circumvent oversight. The participants were pardoned or had convictions overturned. After September 11, 2001, most restrictions were abandoned. The practices the Church Committee had exposed and supposedly ended returned under new names and new justifications. The Church Committee moment was an exception, not a turning point. The covert state adapted and continued. As we discussed in episode 9, the same secrecy that enables covert action also enables betrayal. As the cases of Kim Philby and Aldrich Ames demonstrated, agencies that operate without oversight can be turned against the nations they serve. The Church Committee understood this. The reforms attempted to address it. The reforms failed. What do these operations reveal? America maintained an empire without calling it one. The covert operations that overthrew governments and installed dictators were imperial actions, but they were conducted in secret, allowing Americans to believe they lived in a republic that respected other nations' sovereignty. Democratic rhetoric masked authoritarian practice abroad. The same officials who spoke of freedom and self-determination were overthrowing elected governments and installing dictators. Economic interests were consistently served under ideological cover. Oil in Iran, fruit in Guatemala, copper in Chile, minerals in the Congo. The pattern was clear. Corporate interests were protected through covert action, while the public was told that communism was being contained. Long-term consequences were never adequately weighed. Every operation focused on immediate objectives. What would happen afterward? Whether the dictator would create conditions for revolution, whether the intervention would generate lasting hostility? These questions were never seriously asked. And the American taxpayer funded all of it. The black budget, classified appropriations hidden within federal spending, paid for assassination plots, media manipulation, and the overthrow of democracies. Citizens who believed they lived in a republic were funding an empire they knew nothing about. And the body count is staggering. 26 years of dictatorship followed by revolution and ongoing hostility in Iran. Guatemala, 200,000 dead in civil war. Congo, 32 years of kleptocracy, ongoing instability, millions dead in subsequent conflicts. Indonesia, 500,000 to 1 million massacred. Chile, 3,000 killed, 30,000 tortured. In Vietnam, which we will examine in episode 11, was only the beginning. Every one of these operations left legacies we still navigate. Every country remembers what we have forgotten. The why do they hate us question has answers. Answers we often refuse to examine. The founders warned against foreign entanglements. They could not have imagined the entanglements we created or the institutions that would create them in secret, funded by citizens who had no idea what their government was doing. I am Jeff Kellick, and this has been episode 10 of Empire of Liberty, America's Foreign Entanglements, from the Founders to the Forever Wars, on the Consequential Action podcast. On Sunday, Article 11 continues with Graveyard of Empires, Vietnam and the Limits of Power. We will examine the catastrophic war that killed millions, shattered domestic consensus, and demonstrated that the American military force could not reshape societies at will. If you enjoyed this episode and want to follow the series, please subscribe to our Substack page at consequentialactions.com. Here you'll find written articles as well as our previous series on the General Welfare Clause and the New Leviathan. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Consequential Actions Podcast, for video versions of all podcast episodes. And follow me on X, @JKellick, for discussions and announcements. Until next time, have a great day.